Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I am Sean and today I will be ranking the 22 books I set out to read in 2022. So without further ado, Spanish. Let's get into it. So using the same tier system I always do, S tier is a phenomenal book. Everyone in the world should read it. A tier is a really good book. B tier is a pretty good book. You should read it. C tier is a book that I found to be just okay, not good, not bad, definitely not great, definitely not terrible. It's just okay, so I really wouldn't recommend it. And D tier is a book that is just not for me personally. I can't say if it's good or bad, it's just not for me. I couldn't get into it. Finally, E tier is a book that I actively disliked for some reason. Okay, let's go. First on the list was The Darkest King by Gina Showalter. This is a book that I got signed from Walmart. The only reason I bought it was because it was signed. I found out pretty early on this book was simply not for me. The reason was not so much because of any flaw of the book itself, but it's just because the book is written assuming you've read the other books in the series, which I have not. So because of that, it's really difficult, if not impossible, to read and get into this book. So it falls into D tier for me, not for me. However, from the little bit I read, would I be interested in going back and reading the first book? No. So it's just a book that's not for me. I kind of regret buying it. I bought it just for the autograph. So if I ever unhaul any of my signed books, this would probably be one of the first to go. I can't say it's bad, but if you're interested in this book at all, you should definitely read the first book in the series. Don't start out with this one. Second on the list was The Sweet Hereafter by Russell Banks. This is a book that is off the top 1000 list, 1000 books to read before you die by James Mustich. I had not heard of this book or the author before reading it, so I had no expectations going in, and it did not take me long to realize this was a phenomenal book. It was just perfectly written, it was beautifully written, so this book slides immediately up to S tier. The plot of the book is about a school bus that crashes, and so the town and the characters are trying to recover from that. I know that sounds like a very tough emotional subject, but I do not think the book was really that much of a tearjerker. It was emotional, but not that bad, so I do definitely recommend reading it. Do not let the premise push you away from it. You should read this book. It is so well written. It's such a beautiful book. So it became one of my favorite books of all time. Russell Banks became a must-buy author. I got 2 signed books by him, and just the other day I bought 3 unsigned books from him. So I want to read everything he's written. So The Sweet Hereafter, no doubt S tier, phenomenal book. Third on the list is The Bonfire of the Vanities by Tom Wolfe. This is another book off the top 1000 list. I had heard of it before the title, so I knew the title, but I didn't know anything about the book itself. Nothing. So I really went in without any expectations. And it did not take me long to realize this was a book that is just not working out for me. I hated that book, in fact. I did a whole video on it, so if you want to see my issues with the book, I won't go into them here. But if you want to see about my issues with the book, go click over to that up there. Anyway, this book, Bonfire of the Vanities, gets E tier. I just hated this book. Fourth on the list is Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie. So I had heard of Salman Rushdie for a few years, and Midnight's Children is off the top 1000 list. And since I knew of Salman Rushdie, I got 3 signed books by him. I kind of thought I wanted to read everything he's ever written, and I still kind of do. Now, you can kind of guess where this is heading. I actually started Midnight's Children literally 2 days before the stabbing. So I read like 2 pages, and it wound up pretty much putting me to sleep. That's all I lasted. The first reading was 2 pages. 2 days later, he gets stabbed. About a week later, I picked up the book again to try it again. I read 2 more pages. So I read a grand total of 4 pages before deciding this book was just not for me. It's difficult to say why. Basically just the writing was doing nothing for me. It was completely going in one ear and out the other. I flipped through the book like just to see how the rest of the book looked, and the issues I was having with it were like throughout the book. So I just knew really early on this book was doing nothing for me. Based on the reading I attempted, the book is just D tier. That's really unfortunate because I do want to give Salman Rushdie's books every chance in the world, and 4 pages was definitely not enough. So someday I may give it another try, but today is not that day. I would put it above The Darkest King, however, because I'm not going to try to reread The Darkest King. I might with Midnight's Children. Fifth on the list is Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. This is another book off the top 1000 list. I had pretty low expectations before reading this one because I had seen parts of the cartoon where the guy wakes up tied down in a land of little people. So I kind of figured like, oh, I kind of know everything about the book just from that one scene. However, this is a book that parts of it were pretty freaking hilarious, like laugh out loud funny. And this is a book that is written 300 years ago or something like that. So just the fact that this author from 300 years ago could make me laugh out loud today, that's just a phenomenal achievement. So parts of this book were just hilarious. So I would definitely recommend it. Gulliver's Travels gets A tier. Sixth on the list was Treasure Island by R.L. Stevenson. This is a book I kind of had low expectations for. I think it's mostly just because of the author, just R.L. Stevenson. It's just like, yeah, it just sounds old-fashioned-y, and I don't know. I heard of the title Treasure Island, of course, it's such a famous name. Now, if I was ranking this book purely on its own merits, like if I knew nothing about the book whatsoever, it would probably be about a B tier ranking maybe. It's just overall, it's a decent book. However, the main thing for this book is everything you know about pirates probably comes from this book. I mean, everything. Pirates having peg legs and talking parrots and pieces of 8 and Davy Jones' locker. Maps to buried treasures. The saying, shiver me timbers. Because of that, I give Treasure Island A tier. The reason is because this book has just inspired so many other stories, so many pirate stories. So I kind of think, as a writer myself, you should give credit to the original writers. And so R.L. Stevenson is the Mac Daddy of pirate stories. So because of that, I think everyone should give Treasure Island a chance. So it gets A tier. I would, however, put it below Gulliver's Travels. Gulliver's Travels made me laugh out loud. Treasure Island, there was no real part of it that was just epic. So it goes below Gulliver's Travels. 7 on the list was Kidnapped, also by R.L. Stevenson and also a top 1000 book. I did not really like Kidnapped as much. I thought it was definitely more old-fashioned-y, even though he wrote it after Treasure Island. It definitely sounds like it's written 100 years earlier. Like the dialogue is much more old-fashioned-y. And overall, the book was just kind of bland. There was one scene where these people were attacking the ship. The characters are inside the cabin of the ship trying to fend off these guys attacking. That was a great scene. If the book would have been more like that, it probably would have been an A-tier book as well. But that was really the only great scene of the book. So Kidnapped gets C tier. 8 on the list was The Power and the Glory by Graham Greene. This was actually the 4th book I'd read by Graham Greene, and it is the first of 3 books by him that are on the top 1000 list. So, Graham Greene is a real peculiar author to me because I would not know anything to say about him that is particularly good. Like his plots, his stories, his characterizations, whatever. Nothing about his writing really blows me away, but I enjoy all of his books the same, and that's been the case for all 4. I've enjoyed all of them. The Power and the Glory, I think, was actually my favorite of the 4 books that I read by him. So, Ranking this book is difficult. I kind of want to give it an A tier because I did enjoy the book. There was nothing I saw wrong with it. It was really quite a flawless book. But if I think about other books where I would rank it, I think it would belong most among B tier. So that's where it goes. 9 on the list was The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas, and this is a book off the top 1000 list, and I recently did a video all about The Count of Monte Cristo, so if you want to watch that, go click over to that. Just remember to come back here and watch the rest of the video. So, because I posted it up there, I don't want to go in depth about The Count of Monte Cristo. Basically, the start of the book was real good. It had a lot of potential, but in the end, about 25–30% through, the book just really began to lose steam for me. The plot was just way over complicated and stupid, and I had some other problems with the book as well. So personally, I would put The Count of Monte Cristo in C tier. However, I know a lot of booktubers really rave about The Count of Monte Cristo, so because of that, I would still say you should probably read it, just because so many other people do like this book. Since the first third of the book was pretty good, and since so many other booktubers do rave about this book, I would put it above Kidnapped. 10 on the list was Germinal by Emile Zola. So this is a real difficult book to talk about. The writing itself was fine. There was really nothing wrong with it. The book was written about 125, maybe 150 years ago. But in spite of that, it was pretty well written. But the fact of the matter was, I just didn't really want to read it. If I would have had to read this as part of an assignment in school, it'd be fine. It'd be enjoyable. But reading it for my own personal enjoyment, or even reading it studying writing itself, it's just not really a book I'm interested in, even though there's nothing fundamentally wrong with the book. Because of that, it's difficult to know where to put it. I mean, it kind of leaned toward either C or D tier, but I put it in C tier. I would put it below Kidnapped, however, because Kidnapped at least had the scene where the guys were in the ship trying to fend off the attackers. That was a great scene. Germinal, in the first however many pages I read, it did not have a scene like that that really excited me. So it goes below Kidnapped. 11 on the list was Catch-22 by Joseph Heller, and I have a couple signed books by Joseph Heller, which I was really excited about because Catch-22 is such an iconic classic book. So I had, I guess, high hopes for it. I knew the book was a satire basically of World War II, and as I started reading, I definitely had moments where I laughed, and I thought this book would be a 5-star book. However, the problem I had with Catch-22 is that the humor quickly became repetitive. It just all followed the exact same pattern. So, reading it, the first time I read a scene or a chapter, it worked. It was fine. The second time I read a chapter, it's like, well, hey, you just followed the exact same formula of the previous chapter. You didn't add anything else. And then read the next chapter and it just did the same thing. So as a result, there's a law of diminishing returns. Every time he tries to do the same joke in the same way, it just gets less and less funny. So I read about 100 pages of this book, really trying to give it every chance in the world, but I was just enjoying it less and less, and it might deserve to go into E tier. However, I'm going to put it into C tier because it did have moments where I liked it, moments that were funny. It definitely had potential, but it just did not sustain. Or it sustained in a bad way. It sustained by doing the exact same thing over and over and over again and not changing it up, not adding to it. So I just hated this book. But it still had potential, so it would go above Germinal. 12 on the list was Richard II by Will.i.am Shakespeare, and this is a book off the top 1000 list. And this is the first William Shakespeare play that I have read since high school. Before reading this play, I had heard that Shakespeare is like the master of English, that he used it so well, better than like anyone else who has ever lived. And reading this play, even though it is, I think, definitely one of his lesser known plays, there were still lines time and time again where he just blew me away. Shakespeare was truly a genius. He used English so well. He's just brilliant. It's just so amazing reading some of the lines he came up with. Just truly, truly a genius. As to the play itself, I enjoyed it pretty well, except toward the end, in the final like couple acts of the book, a few characters are trying to get like a pardon for treason so they don't get executed. And who these characters were, I did not know. I mean, they were like such minor characters in the rest of the play, but in the final act of the book, the acts are kind of like revolving all around them. And I was just like, who are these people? Why should I care? So that didn't really work for me. I thought those characters should have been better developed, or that should have just been cut from the play. But anyway, there was so much other stuff in the play, lines by Shakespeare that are just so brilliant that I still have to recommend it. So I put Richard II in B tier. It's not a book or a play I'd say you should run to the library to pick it up, but still, I think everything by Shakespeare should probably be a recommended read, and I don't think you'd be disappointed reading Richard II. So I do recommend it. 13 on the list was The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck, and it goes without saying this is off the top 1000 list by James Moostich. So I know I was probably supposed to read Grapes of Wrath in high school, but I didn't. Now, when I started reading it, it did not take me long. I think the first sentence or two for a major red flag to pop up, and that was over description. If you've seen my channel before, you may know I do not like much description in novels, and this book, The Grapes of Wrath, would be an example of bad description, I think. John Steinbeck just describes everything about everything, and there's no reason to it. So I think in the second chapter I read, there would have been only one sentence in the second chapter that I would have kept. All the rest of it would have been cut. One sentence was the only good part in the chapter. So I just hated the book. It was just over description. So I know it's like a classic book. It's a great American novel, but it's over description. It's purple prose. It should be cut. The book should be at least like 200 pages shorter. If the book was 150 pages, it might be great. It might be a classic. As it is, it's just way overdone, way over descriptive. The description doesn't do anything to further the plot or the character or the stories. It's just trash. So, because of that, I would like to put The Grapes of Wrath in E tier, but I think that'd kind of be unfair because it's nothing about the book I really justly hated. It's just I don't like description in novels, and this was that. So I think because of that, it's just a book that is not for me. So, therefore, The Grapes of Wrath goes in D tier. I would still put it above Midnight's Children, even though I do want to read Midnight's Children again, and I don't really want to read The Grapes of Wrath again. At least The Grapes of Wrath is known as a classic, so you should probably read it before reading Midnight's Children. So because of that, I put it above Midnight's Children, but it still gets D tier. 14 on the list was As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner, another book off the top 1000 list. Now, I do not like William Faulkner at all. Of all of the writers on earth, he would probably be in my top 10 least favorite writers ever. I just don't like his writing. I think he wrote mainly in like a stream of consciousness writing, and I just don't like that. So like The Catcher in the Rye is written in stream of consciousness writing. The Bonfire of the Vanities, another book on this list, I think that's kind of written stream of consciousness writing. Stream of consciousness writing just doesn't work out for me, or I have just not liked the authors who have done it. So I just don't like William Faulkner. I just can't get into his books. Would this book get into E tier though? I don't know if it quite deserves it. I would want to put it at the very bottom of D tier, but still, it is William Faulkner, a very popular author. So I would put it above The Darkest King. But honestly, I enjoyed more of The Darkest King than any of William Faulkner. I just don't like him at all. So it gets above The Darkest King, but only based on reputation. 15 on the list was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey. This is not a book off the top 1000 list, but it is a book I enjoyed a lot, and I did a review of it not too long ago, so I will post that up there. So I'd recommend go giving that a look, but come back here when you're done. I really liked One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I thought it was overall just a really well-written story. The characters are iconic. I liked the themes of the book were all well done. I did have some issues with it, however, but that did not detract too much from my enjoyment of the book. So One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest I would put in A tier. And I think I would put it above Gulliver's Travels. So even though Gulliver's Travels had parts that were just hilarious and that still make me laugh, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was just such a well-written book. It did not have like slow points like Gulliver's Travels did. So I just enjoyed the book a lot more all the way through. So it goes above Gulliver's Travels in A tier. 16 on the list was Angela's Ashes by Frank McCourt. Now, this is a book that I'd heard a lot of praise for, especially from my aunt. She loved this book. But I had heard before reading this book that this book, Angela's Ashes, does not have quotation marks in dialogue. And one of the hills I will die on is that every book needs quotation marks in dialogue. Otherwise, I just do not want to read it. It is so distracting. So, because of that, I kind of refuse to read Angela's Ashes on principle because it does not have quotation marks. Now, I do actually have a signed copy of Angela's Ashes, but still, I am going to stick to my guns on this one. I just do not want to read a book without quotation marks. You have to use quotation marks in novels. So, because of that, this book goes into E tier. I just will not read it. I hate that. Use quotation marks. I will, however, put it above The Bonfire of the Vanities. Just because The Bonfire of the Vanities actually had things that I actively disliked in the novel, and Angela's Ashes had things that pissed me off without even reading the novel. So, I think Bonfire of the Vanities is worse because of that. 17 on the list was The Firm by John Grisham, and this is a book off the top 1000 list. Now, this is the first John Grisham book that I had attempted. There were parts reading this book where I laughed out loud because the plot was so bad. It was just terrible. But still, I did like some of the pacing and all that, so I think he could write a good book if he applied himself and used a good plot, but this was definitely not it. So I give The Firm C tier. 18 on the list was What's Wrong with Sports by Howard Cosell, a book that I have a signed copy of. So there's not too much to say about this one really because it is what it is. It's a nonfiction book of Howard Cosell just talking about like different scandals in sports. The thing about this book that I really liked is all of it was still relevant. So he was talking about like drug use and I think like physical domestic abuse cases and like college scandals. So he talks about like whether college athletes should earn money, and he talks about how colleges have like gone around the rules to lure college athletes. He talks about really everything that's still relevant today. He talks about Pete Rose and cheating in baseball. He just talks about so much stuff. And it's all really interesting, I thought. So I would definitely recommend it. If you're like even a casual sports fan, if you know about these people like Pete Rose, Muhammad Ali, if you like college sports, you should definitely give the book a read. So because of that, the book gets B tier. 19 is another nonfiction book, and I have a signed copy of it right up here, but that is Val Kilmer, I'm Your Huckleberry. So it's just his memoirs, and here's basically the thing about it is I think if you're interested in Val Kilmer, it's a pretty good book. It gives you a good snapshot of his life and all of his different movies and kind of some of the backstory about that. It also talks about his relationships. So if you're interested in that, if you're interested in Val Kilmer, it's definitely worth reading. However, there is really not too much I think you could get from this book that you would not get simply from reading like the Wikipedia page on Val Kilmer or reading the Wikipedia page on each specific movie. He does not go in depth talking about the production of every single movie. He gives just kind of a glimpse at it. So because of that, it's not like an in-depth tell-all book. So it's really up to you. If you're just casually interested, it's a pretty good book. It's not a bad read. If you want to know all of the details, it's probably not quite what you want. You probably already know most of this stuff anyway. Ranking it, I would put it in B tier. Overall, not bad. Worth reading, especially if you're interested in Val Kilmer. But is it a tell-all book? Is it a phenomenal book? No. So it just gets B tier. 20th on the list as we approach the end here was The Return of the Indian by Lynn Reed Banks. This is the second book in the Indian in the Cupboard series, and I actually have a signed copy of it, which is real sweet. So I wanted to read this book because I liked the first book, The Indian in the Cupboard, very well. However, I just had major problems with the plotting of this book, and I did a whole review on it talking about all the issues I had with this book. So if you want to see that, I will actually post that down in the description below. So I would recommend go giving that a look, but make sure you return to this video. Anyway, so yeah, I had problems with this book, and really it killed the series for me. So ranking it, it does not get E tier, even though I had major problems with it. It wasn't a book that I hated. So I put it in C tier. I would still put it above Germinal, but I just didn't really like the book, and it did kill the series for me. So mainly I would recommend reading The Indian in the Cupboard, the first book. That's fine, that's great, that's a good book. This book I would not recommend, so it gets C tier. 21 on the list was In the Lake of the Woods by Tim O'Brien. Last year I read The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, my first book by him, and I absolutely loved that book. So because of that, I put this book on the 22 books to read in 2022 list. And this is a book I have a signed copy of, which I'm really glad about because I loved The Things They Carried so much. So I did not know what to expect about this book at all. I did not read the description of it or anything, but I was just going off my pure love of The Things They Carried. Now, this book is pretty different from The Things They Carried, and again, I did a whole review on this book, which I'll post down in the description as well. So, ultimately, I loved In the Lake of the Woods. It was just a really beautiful, well-written book. I don't know about the word beautiful. It was very weird in a way, and creepy too. So it's definitely a real peculiar book. I was kind of scratching my head as I read it, trying to figure this book out, and that is really more to the book's favor. So it's definitely a book worth reading. I still do recommend The Things They Carried above this book, but in spite of that, In the Lake of the Woods was a phenomenal book just as much. So because of that, it gets S tier. I would still put it below The Sweet Hereafter because The Sweet Hereafter is a book that I would recommend like straight away. You got to read The Sweet Hereafter. I would not recommend In the Lake of the Woods first off, and it's real difficult because like I say, this is a pretty peculiar book, and I don't want to go into it very much because that would spoil it. And this is a book I do not want to spoil at all. Be cautious. It's not like anything you may have ever read before. It's very peculiar, but still, I really love Tim O'Brien's writing style, and I think he's a great writer and a great storyteller as well. So it's definitely worth reading, but be prepared and try to keep an open mind and be patient with it, and hopefully be ready to kind of have your mind blown and just wonder what the hell is going on here. And that's what you're going to get from this book. So I definitely do recommend it, but be ready for what you're getting into. It's going to be something. 22 on the list was from my then favorite author of all time. Now it's kind of Tim O'Brien, but at the time it was Walter Moore's, and the book was The Alchemist's Apprentice. So this book is from Walter Moore's Zamonia series, which is his like fantastic world he created. So the first book in the series is The 13 and a Half Lives of Captain Blueberry. The second book is Rumo. The third book, I think, is The City of Dreaming Books, which is my favorite book of all time. I absolutely love The City of Dreaming Books. And so I think this book is fourth. And I have had really kind of an up and down relationship reading Walter Moore's books. So I absolutely love The City of Dreaming Books, best book ever written. And I really liked The 13 and a Half Lives of Captain Bluebear. Great book as well. I also really liked another book of his, A Wild Ride Through the Night. I liked all three of those books. The second book in the series, Rumo, I did not really like much at all. This book, The Alchemist's Apprentice, I am so torn on it. There are definitely parts in the book that are like classic Walter Moore's that I enjoyed. However, the plot of the book was just going way too slow for me. It was really going nowhere. I kept waiting for something to happen. Even though things are happening in each scene or each chapter, it's not pushing the book forward. It's just like little scenes that's like, okay, well, is something going to happen now? No. Okay, here's another scene. Is something going to happen now? No. And just nothing was happening in the book, and I just got tired of it. So halfway through, I just wound up DNFing this book. So that's really unfortunate. Ranking it, I would put it in C tier, and I think it would go above The Count of Monte Cristo, even though The Count of Monte Cristo had the good first third of the book or whatever and is highly regarded. I still think I enjoyed at least parts of The Alchemist's Apprentice more, but I just had problems with it. Really, it's just the plotting was just so slow. I think I have one more Walter Moore's book that has been published in English, and that's The Labyrinth of Dreaming Books. That's the sequel to The City of Dreaming Books. So I've kind of been holding off on reading that because The City of Dreaming Books is my favorite book of all time. So I'm just so worried reading the sequel to that book. Will it be as good as The City of Dreaming Books? How can it be? How can it not be a disappointment from that book? So I'm just so worried about that, and I've kind of been saving it. But since I don't have any other Walter Moore's books to read, now I guess it's time to turn to The Labyrinth of Dreaming Books. So anyway, that is the ranking of the 22 books I put on my 22 books to read in 2022 list video. So my favorite book of the year, without a doubt, was The Sweet Hereafter by Russell Banks. I had never heard of him before reading this book, and it was just an awesome book. So because of that, I want to read everything he has written. Also, Tim O'Brien, In the Lake of the Woods. I loved the things they carried, and I loved this book as well. So this year, this book, In the Lake of the Woods, kind of confirmed my love of Tim O'Brien and made him an instant buy author as well. So this was the year dominated by Tim O'Brien and Russell Banks. I think another major riser this year for me would be Shakespeare. I did not really know what to expect reading Shakespeare so much. I know he's like this master of English, but I did not quite expect before reading the play Richard II to like it as much as I did. I thought a lot of Shakespeare's lines would kind of go in one ear and out the other, and that kind of was the case. I understood maybe like 60% of what he was saying, but there were still parts of his writing that's just so beautiful. Such a genius, William Shakespeare. So this was another good year for Shakespeare for me. It definitely piques my interest in reading more by him. The other winner I think would be Ken Kesey, the author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I really like that book. I have the signed book by him down here, which is a sailor song. So I think that will definitely go on my to-read list. Anyway, that is it. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you'll tune in to my 23 books to read in 2023 list video that'll be coming up pretty soon. So, thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Ciao. Ooh, Chinese.